He wants to tax doctors away when we have a doctor shortage. He wants to tax farmers when we have a food price crisis. He wants to tax home builders when we don't have enough homes. He wants to tax small business when our economy is already falling off the cliff and having the worst growth in the G7. Mr. Speaker, that is insanity.
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre there railing against the Liberal government's move to increase the capital gains inclusion rate. Despite Conservative opposition and outcry from several sectors in Canada, the House voted this afternoon to move forward with the proposed tax changes. The Liberal government says the measures needs to be implemented in order to increase government revenue, and government revenue, it says, will be invested to help all Canadians. Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance Chrystia Freeland is spearheading this, and she joins me in the studio now. Deputy Prime Minister, it's good to see you.
Great to be with you, David.
Pierre Poilievre says this is a tax on farmers, a tax on doctors, it's going to make life more expensive, and it's going to kill jobs. How do you push back against that?
This is about fairness for every generation. It is about being able to make essential investments in housing, in affordability, things like a national school food program, things like dental care. Make essential investments in our economy, things like $5 billion in universities and basic research. We know Canada needs those investments, and if you believe that, then you have to say, how are we going to pay for them? Are we just going to take on more debt? Not fair, and also not great at a time when we want interest rates to come down. And
but aren't we kind of doing both?
And so our decision is tax fairness. Our decision is to say we currently have a tax system where a nurse or a carpenter can pay tax at a higher marginal rate than a multimillionaire. That's not fair. We're changing that, and in doing so, we're raising some money that we can invest in housing, in dental care, in things that Canadians need.
But the taxes, the tax increase, the revenue gains from the capital gains changes won't cover all of that, right? There's still a deficit of about $40 billion is your projections, and I know we're waiting for the final numbers to come in on the year past. But that is debt and debt servicing costs that will also go to that next generation. So you're kind of doing both. You're raising taxes in a way some people don't like and adding to the debt.
Actually not. Canada's fiscal track is very responsible. Our AAA rating was reaffirmed by the two main ratings agencies after the budget. We have the lowest debt and deficit in the G7. And the proof that we're running a fiscally responsible policy is the Bank of Canada last week was the first bank in the G7 able to lower interest rates because we've been supporting that path.
But, you know, it's not just Mr. Poilievre doing the criticism. The Canadian Medical Association is warning that this is going to make it more difficult for doctors, some of who are looking at considering their options. Grain growers of Canada are saying this is going to increase their taxes by about 30% on family-run grain farms. You've seen companies like Shopify, which is one of the darlings of the tech sector, saying this is a tax on innovation and risk-taking. So there are pretty key sectors of the social fabric and the economy of the country pushing back on this.
Look, I am really sympathetic to people like doctors who are concerned. I'm sympathetic. I grew up on a farm. My dad's a farmer. To people like farmers who are concerned. I think it is important to start when talking to all Canadians by saying this is a change that is going to affect less than 1% of Canadians, 0.13%. People's principal residence remains totally free of capital gains tax. You only pay at the higher rate after your first $250,000 of capital gains in a given year. For a couple who, say, have a rental property, they can make a $500,000 profit before paying an additional dollar. And the important thing also to recognize is right now we have a tax system that is tilted to give an advantage to people who are getting investment income. For someone like a teacher, someone like an electrician, whose main income, whose only income is from a salary, they pay tax on 100% of their salary. Someone who is getting their income through investments, currently only 50% of their investment is taxed. So let's imagine you're a great investor, David. I hope you are.
But a lot of that would be after-tax income.
Let's imagine you make a great investment, and let's imagine that before our changes, you earn $2 million in your investment. Right now, $1 million of it you just put to the side, and it doesn't even touch the tax system. A nurse can't do that with her salary. That's not fair. And so we're changing it, and we're saying from June 25th, 2/3 of investment income of your capital gain above $250,000 a year is now going to be taxed. That is fair, and crucially, it is giving us the money to invest in things like housing, like early learning and childcare, that Canadians really need.
But a percentage of your capital gains gets sheltered because you need to make income to have money to invest, and that is already taxed, and then it goes into the investment, whatever you make, and that's what the argument is, that it is money that has already had a tax paid on it. And when you look at the example of doctors right now, and I know this is something...
Again, the only thing, David, I want to say on that is you haven't paid tax on the gain.
No.
The money that you invested, sure, but in my example, where you're making $2 million in a capital gain, that is $2 million that has never been taxed. That's $2 million of capital gain you're making. And by the way, I am glad in this theoretical David, the entrepreneur example,
Right.
I'm really glad you've made $2 million. It means you've made a great investment in Canada. It means that you're contributing to our country. I'm just saying, David, right now, only $1 million of that is taxed. I think 2/3 of it should be taxed. And I think the vast majority of Canadians, they believe in fairness. They think it is fair that a multimillionaire should not be paying tax at a lower rate
Right.
than a nurse. And also, Canadians recognize we need to make investments in our country. That's what we're doing.
So the new inclusion rate kicks in at above $250,000 for an individual. It comes in on $1 for a corporation, right? And this is the situation a lot of doctors find themselves in. And I know this wasn't the federal government's doing, but in negotiations with provincial governments, they secured the right to incorporate, to have a better life from the tax advantages that provided, rather than getting a pay increase from governments. And this was done in lean times or for whatever reasons. They now see this changing. And the reality is that doctors, who the next generation is also going to need, who have incorporated, are going to be worse off. They're going to have less under this system. You gave an exemption to all entrepreneurs, or a special carve-out in these changes for an entrepreneur capital gains exemption. Why not do that for medical professionals, given the shortage we have in that particular field?
Okay, there are very many questions you've sort of jammed in there, so I'm going to try to take them one by one, but quickly. I'm glad you've raised the issue of doctors, because I think that our medical system in Canada is one of the most important things we have in our country. It's a pillar of our country. I think having universal, single-payer medical care is one of the things that makes us Canadian. And especially after COVID, I think all of us are so grateful to our doctors, to our nurses, to all healthcare professionals who take care of us. And that is why this budget funds $200 billion, the largest investment in Canadian history in the healthcare system. And we're making further investments with dental care, which a lot of Canadians need. 2 million people have signed up already. The free diabetes medicine and prescription contraceptives.
That's the health system, though, not
Right,
the
but-
doctors and their
sure,
financial well-being.
But you're talking about the health system, and I'm saying we're making major investments. Those cost money. Nurses are healthcare professionals too, and the current system disadvantages them relative to people who are earning investment income. We need to think about that. Having said all of that, you started with the point about doctors and provinces, and we've heard that argument. Here's some good news. This measure, increasing the capital gains inclusion rate, means the provinces will have additional revenue as well, around $12 billion. That's a lot of money, and the province of Quebec, which has the option of opting in or opting out, has chosen to opt in. What I'd like to say to all Canadians, starting with doctors who think that we need to be investing more in our medical system, in our doctors, is if you think that that agreement that you made with the provinces is not good enough, let's say to the provinces, spend some of that money on doctors. $12 billion would go a long way.
But that is counting on provincial governments to solve a problem that doctors say your government is creating right now. There's no guarantee Doug Ford's going to do that, or Scott Moe is going to do that, or David Eby's going to do that. So you could create a potential situation where the doctors in these provinces, any provinces, could be worse off under this, and that could change how they do
the last
things.
time I checked, David, the provinces are principally responsible for the healthcare system.
Yes, of course.
And you referred in your preamble, which was great, to a deal that you have been hearing people are saying was struck between doctors and provinces.
Well, there's their various
And
negotiations, right?
And so my point is, provinces are now going to have more revenue if a province, if the people of a province, if we as Canadians think doctors' salaries are too low, the answer here is to say their provinces are going to have more revenue. They are really welcome to use some of that revenue to pay doctors more. But I'd like to get back to the core thing that we're talking about. And the core thing that we're talking about, the core thing that Parliament voted on today is, do you believe in fairness for every generation? Do you believe that Canada needs investments? I do. I think we need investments in housing. I think we need investments in affordability. I think we need investments in the economy. I think we need to make those investments in a fiscally responsible way. And I think the fair way to pay for those investments is tax fairness, is to say, you know what? Right now we have a system where a teacher can pay tax at a higher marginal rate than a multimillionaire. Let's change that, and let's use the money to make Canada a better place.
Okay, so just as a final point, obviously there's a political component to this, the contrast between the Liberals and the Conservatives in particular on this. The Conservatives voted against this after Mr. Poilievre rose. And
David, not only in particular, because the Conservatives are the only party that voted against this. The Bloc voted in favour. The Greens voted in favour, the NDP voted in favour.
But Mr. Poilievre, I would assume, say that the way to remedy that tax inequity is to lower the taxes on the nurses, so they are in a more beneficial situation.
I'm not him.
But no, I know, but
as you may have noticed.
Yes, that is very clear. But part of the strategy, as I understand it, was to force the Liberals, to force the Conservatives to take a position on this, to vote on this, and this is why it was separated out from the budget, whether that's true or not. But I wonder, the wedge that is apparently being played here, what is it you think Canadians learned about Pierre Poilievre with this that they didn't already know? I mean, I am not shocked he voted against the tax increase. I mean, what's the political benefit of having them vote against this specifically?
Well, look, let me just start by saying it is not at all unusual to have major tax measures like this one be presented as standalone legislation. Having said that, you ask a great question, which is, what have we learned about Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives? And I think we did learn something. I mean, let's remember, it took the Conservatives 8 weeks to make up their mind. And for 8 weeks, they were dithering, they were deflecting, they were evading. You saw, you're a journalist, you saw it. They would not give a straight answer. This was an agonizing process for them to come down and say which side they were on. And so here's what I think we've learned. I think we've learned that the Conservatives are phony when it comes to standing up for regular people, when it comes to standing up for working people. At the end of the day, they had a choice to make. Were they going to be on the side of a plumber or a nurse and say, yeah, it's not fair that you pay tax at a higher marginal rate than a multimillionaire? They could have voted for the plumber and for the nurse. Today, they chose not to. That's what we learned.
Okay, I have a million more questions, but I have no more time. You have to go do a vote in the House of Commons. But Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland, thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. The government forced a vote on its capital gains tax increases today, and spoiler alert, it passed. But Conservatives made their case against it in question period.
During a housing shortage, he wants to tax home builders. During a healthcare shortage, he wants to tax away our doctors. During a food price crisis, he wants to tax our farmers. And while our economy is shrinking more than any other economy in the G7, he wants to tax our small business job creators. Mr. Speaker, isn't this the definition of insanity?
For 8 weeks since we put our budget forward, the Conservatives have been incredibly careful not to say a thing about the capital gains rate that we're raising. They didn't want to talk about it for 2 full months. The reality is they have an opportunity to vote with middle-class Canadians, and they're choosing to vote against them.
Okay, so that vote passed 208 to 118, and here's what the Prime Minister had to say afterwards.
The Conservative leader is turning his back on Canadians who need support with affordability.
Okay, how will Canadians see these tax increases? We're back with the Power Panel, Kate Harrison, Michelle Cadario, Jason Markusoff, and Françoise Boivin. Kate, you listened in on that. You listened on the interview with the Deputy Prime Minister. The Liberals want this to be a wedge. Is it the wedge they think it can be?
No, I think they could have picked a much more challenging wedge to draw the Conservatives into a debate around taxing the ultra-rich, the ultra-wealthy, be it by corporate tax rates, excessive tax profits, et cetera, or excessive profits tax, excuse me. So, but they've chosen this kind of convoluted, difficult to explain capital gains option that, in my view, hurts the kind of hopes and dreams of a lot of Canadians. Even if they're not impacted today, there's many people, according to public opinion data, that feel they could be impacted someday. So they've got the reality of a tax burden right now with things like the carbon tax that are very punishing on their current day reality. And then they hear about the capital gains tax, and even if it's not a reality for them today, they think it could be. So it's actually hurting that kind of aspirational desire that a lot of Canadians have to improve their socioeconomic status. I think by impacting not that 1%, by impacting farmers and doctors and others that are trying to sell their business, those that might have second properties, they have picked a different kind of constituency to try and draw that wedge. Whereas if they were talking about, leaders of grocery chains, for example, right, Canadians might have a bit of a different perspective on this.
But it might not give them the revenue they want, Michelle, and might not be able to basically, they're trying to say to the Conservatives, we need this to pay for these things, and you're voting against this, or you're voting against these. It seems to be how they're trying to frame it.
Yeah,
right?
You could look at this as one of the most tactical things that this government has done in quite a while. They set up the argument. It clearly wasn't easy and concise because it did take him, Pierre Poilievre, 2 months to try and figure out and scratch his head to how he was going to come out on this. And he only, let's be honest, he wouldn't have come out yesterday or today unless he actually had to have a vote in the House today. So, it remains to be seen how Canadians are going to feel about this. I think that they've nicely kind of wedged in the provinces as well because they're getting all this excess revenue too. And so, they're not going to want to throw that back necessarily. It will be up for Canadians to decide because without question, only people who worry about investment income, which is not the everyday Canadian who's worrying about, mortgage payments or, if they can even afford a house, are the ones who are worried about their investment income having a slightly higher tax rate. So,
Françoise, we got clarity on how they're going to vote on capital gains today from the Conservatives. The other thing we heard from Pierre Poilievre is that within 60 days of becoming Prime Minister, he's going to strike a commission or an advisory panel of some sort to come up with his bring-it-home tax cut, as he's calling it. Does that mean we have to wait until after an election to see their tax plan and get a sense of how do you cost a platform if you're not going to develop your tax policy until you start the process 60 days after you win?
Exactly. You nail it. I don't think we'll see any real numbers. I think it's going to be generalities. And you know what? What is scary? It's working. Because I understand the points Michelle is making, but at the same time, I'm almost on the same page as Kate on this one, not because I want to be, but because it's going to be a battle of message. On one hand, you have tax fairness versus the word tax on any sentence, in any sentences. Mm-hmm. And that's the Conservatives. And that hit the nail for people because they will not go into the explanation. I was listening to the Deputy Prime Minister. And I mean, when you have to explain, and it's not necessarily super clear, except the fact that I know you've got 2 million somewhere.
Yes, my magical 2 million in capital gains. Yeah.
Exactly. When you start getting into this, it becomes so complicated as the message from the Conservative is you're taxing farmers, you're taxing people who saved all their lives. So I'm not so sure, but you're super right in saying he's going to have that committee. That means it's going to be after the election. We will have no idea what they're going to cut, right, how they're going to get their money, and that is also scary.
Jason, your thoughts on how this unfolded today?
Well, in terms of the promise, it'll be whatever people want in their imaginations. It'll be an income tax. It'll be a corporate tax for some people. It'll be a business tax. It'll be an investment tax. Will it be $19 billion? Roughly what this capital gains tax increase will or inclusion increase will raise, or will it be something else? I'm also struck by the repeated reference to this 2-month period or 8 weeks or whatever of dithering by Pierre Poilievre. Well, now he's made a decision. And look, if the election was over the last 2 months, people may have decided based on the waffling. But right now, you know, we're going to have an election in about a year's time, and people will have much more clear memory of what he's going to do and what he did do on this than this little period of 2 months of waffling, which will have been more than a year ago by next fall.
Yeah, Kate, I'm not at all surprised they voted against this. I mean, when Axe the tax is the mantra of your rallies, it's tough to stand up in Parliament and vote in favor of a tax increase of any kind, even if you could theoretically get around to agreeing with it. But the plan they rolled out today, that within 60 days of winning and becoming Prime Minister, that's when we're going to develop a plan for Canada's taxation, that could be 18 months from now before they even start developing it. I mean, I know we said Pierre Poilievre doesn't have to release anything until the election. Now it sounds like he's not going to release a tax policy, which could affect costing, until after he wins. I mean, how do you reconcile that?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I would draw a distinction, I think, between what a comprehensive review of Canada's tax system and reform would look like and what the Conservatives might offer, for example, on income tax relief. Just for example, they already have detailed the fact that obviously they would look to roll back the consumer carbon tax.
Of course. Yeah.
And I suspect that over the course of the next 14, 16 months, however long till the next election, we'll hear more of those affordability policies. But I come back to just the challenge with this particular type of tax for the Liberals at a time when they are also trying to recruit innovators and job creators via, for example, the $2 billion they put into AI and quantum funding. They are at the same time kneecapping a lot of those businesses from being able to offer stock options for employees.
There is the entrepreneur credit, which may help.
So, and when we talk about 8 weeks of dithering, the Liberals have had to address some of the problems with their own policy. They've made a carve out now for mining, for example. So I think taking a considered view of this is not to be equated with dithering. But again, we see kind of the government trying to suck and blow on this issue at the same time. They're saying, yeah, we want to create a really attractive investment environment for innovators and entrepreneurs, but at the same time doing something that we're hearing from that very community is going to be problematic in terms of their decision to come to Canada and their recruitment of key talent.
Michelle?
I actually think she distilled it quite well in terms of, do you want doctors to pay less tax rate than nurses and teachers and plumbers? That's what it actually comes down to, because doctors have the benefit of incorporating and having a significantly lower tax rate. That's the question on the table. That's the wedge that they want. And listen, I've been the architect of more than a few processes that can kind of get me through something that I don't really want to deal with until some other future time. And that's exactly the puff
but
that
at
he
a
put out
at a time
today.
when we have a doctor shortage, to make that argument that when doctors are standing up and saying, yeah, this is not as attractive a proposition as it was 2 months ago to continue my practice, we have to at least hear those voices and think, this is incongruent with the fact that we have a doctor shortage.
Have you ever been through doctor negotiations when they aren't saying that they don't have enough money whatsoever?
No, but here's what I wonder, Michelle. The pushback, it seems to me, would be then make it more attractive for nurses, not less attractive for doctors.
By cutting the rate.
Right? That seems to be the rebuttal, which would also resonate with it.
We would all like to pay less tax, but who's going to pay for the services that we want? And that's the choice that the Liberals have put on the table. Are these services important enough to you to maintain our tax rate and to ask those who pay a little bit less in a tax rate, those other than salaried, to pay a little bit more? If you don't want those services, that's something else. That's going to be the choice in the election campaign. Pierre Poilievre certainly isn't offering everybody this big tax break. Let's be clear on that. It's gonna. They put the wedge in there. Let's see how it goes.
Okay, there is a lack of clarity, let's say, on specifics on the Conservative plan because they're waiting for the election. But I got 60 seconds left. Françoise, 30 seconds to you, and then to Jason.
I still say it's a question of how the message is received by the person you're aiming at, because I know they want to make it a generational thing. Will youth go back to the Liberal Party with this battle? I'm not so sure. On one hand, they have Pierre Poilievre saying, hey, I'm going to axe unfairness. And that's how the people are feeling right now, that they're not treated fairly. So we'll see, like Michelle says, we'll see how it unfolds. And let's see.
Okay, Jason, last word to you, man.
Let me use part of my time to say happy birthday, Françoise, and the rest of my time to say, it's going to be which message is going to resonate more clearly: tax fairness or axe the job-killing tax. Thus far in the polls, the Conservative message has won out strong and clear, but who knows where the debate shifts.
Okay, we'll leave it there because there's a lot of things we don't know, and we'll have to find out in the fullness of time, as it would say. All right, I want to thank you all, Françoise Boivin, Jason Markusoff, Kate Harrison, and Michelle Cadario. Thanks so much to the Power Panel.